unmuting.
There you go.
Yes, right. Hi,
Hi, how are you?
I'm all right, and you're well?
I am, yes,
Okay,
actually.
good, good to know. Uh, I saw your page after the last time we spoke, and I had a better chance to see the level of involvement and activities, and it's good. It takes people getting involved to make some changes.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm hoping we'll be able to do that. Yeah, we've got a bunch of things scheduled through the end of the year now. Um, and we're going to do a listening to the land class with Peter Donovan in the fall. And so I'm kind of excited about that. Uh,
Tell
so
me more about listening to the land.
As I understand it, it's a 4 to 6 hour outdoor exploration of different kinds of land, wasteland, farmland, grass, forest, to talk about how soil and water work in those different areas and how to improve that.
Okay. Um, yes. There's a fellow who, for a number of years, has been doing some really interesting work. Has a project called Water Stories.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Zach Weiss.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Zach is really interesting. What he's accomplished
Hmm.
and what he learned from different folks. Um, what's the name of the gentleman that you're going to have
Peter
speaking?
Peter Donovan, and he's from Soil Carbon Coalition.
Okay. Um, it's fascinating because in the 21st century, people start to realize that they should be understanding the landscape.
Yeah.
Um, so, in fact, I can start speaking about Mike and Judy Corbett. I read your questions, and so it's really appropriate because one of your questions, I think your first question to me was, um, what was the developer trying to do?
Yeah.
And he was trying to replicate the environment because in a way the land that they acquired, the 60 acres, was located in the west side of the city of Davis that had west of the highway 113, and that was new land that the city was expanding and had already acquired development rights, but most of the land was agricultural lands. Um, so Judy and Mike had several purposes with the project as a whole, but from a bigger perspective, he looked at the field, 60 acres, where when he was watching the fields during the rains, the fields would be planted with winter wheat.
Hmm.
Winter wheat used to be one of the rotational crops in our landscape. And then he understood that, and we also have YOLO clay loam soils.
Oh, okay.
And that is that's another level of detail. What soils are you
Yes.
working with? And that determines to a great extent what kind of water harvesting you're thinking of doing. And then if it is so he recognizes that there's very little runoff out of this area, and he would like to then replicate an environment obviously modified that would permeate most of the water that comes in that area, except for when we do get every now and then during the winter, we get several atmospheric river events. And when we get those events, then there is runoff. So he translated that to say, let's design a landscape that will accept most of the water when it's normal rains, and make sure that this design establishes a exit points when there is too much water too fast, so that we can have runoff. And the runoff from the project goes into the city's um, stormwater system. And so that was kind of his vision there, that let's create a permeable environment, and that there would be more permeable materials. And I think that at that moment, they can they begin to recognize that to create that ability to hold that amount of water, they would need to modify the human space. And that because they needed more land dedicated to be impermeable, then it would lead you to think that how do you accomplish that? You end up with smaller lots. So the footprint of the dwellings is smaller than your standard practice
Okay.
in a suburban neighborhood development, where they give you big lots, big houses, and enough backyard for you to play.
Yeah.
And in this case, the idea was, let's do smaller lots. That's going to force the homes to be smaller,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of the concept of also um, live with less, if you will, and to the extent that there would be more land that is to be shared,
Mm-hmm.
because the lots are smaller, but people recognize that with this small lot comes access to more land than they would have otherwise with their little backyard.
Right. Right.
So it's brilliant,
Yeah.
because it's telling folks, don't worry that your lot is small. You're still going to have a little front yard and a little backyard, but the backyards are not fenced because they're open to a common area. And
Mm.
your piece of the land, once, so you get to share your lot line, and past that now is shared land between the four homes that would be facing each other in the back ends. And in between them, there would be a swale that is moving water from somewhere on its way to somewhere else. And you're part of that community. You're actually now responsible for making sure that the swales flow,
Yeah.
and that you don't intervene in the swale's ability to transport water.
Mm.
So you get some duties and responsibilities.
Uh-huh.
And that makes these common areas where you have two homes, and we're sharing some common area, and we're responsible for the landscape of it. So people have to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And that was Judy Corbett, who brings her knowledge on human ecology, as she was a graduate student at the university, to create environments where people need to come together. It's almost more than want to come. They need to, because if you move into this new model, it comes with an understanding that you're actually sharing land, that I put in a little bit of it and somebody else put land, and that becomes a common land. And that's a concept that is really foreign to most of the American way of life
Yeah.
thinking. And I think that that's the breakthrough. The breakthrough is to 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 have the courage for them to say, this is the kind of project we want to build. We don't want to build your standard suburbia.
Right.
And we're going to dedicate a lot of land that is available for all to access. And so they create large uh, park fields. They call it Big Green. Another one is Parque Chico, um, and
And
then
there's
there is
garden areas.
and then there are vegetable garden areas that
Yeah,
are
and
located strategically in the north west side of in the west side of the project as he begins to envision how he wants to transform the landscape because obviously you had a flat leveled agricultural field but he wants to
Ricardo,
create a landscape that looks and feels almost like a watershed. And to do that,
Ricardo,
he
Ricardo,
sure.
can I ask you a question before we get into the land design? Because I'm really interested in that.
Sure.
But what came up for me as you were talking about the fact that people have to talk to each other.
Mm,
This project is now 50 years old.
yes,
And so some people have moved in and some people have moved out.
yes,
And I would guess that there's a big change about to happen, that a lot of the original people are older or leaving or whatever,
yes.
and newer people are moving in. So how is that cooperative space still holding up over time?
Okay. Yes, it's good to know that because to the originals, the pioneers would be Mike and Judy and several other young architects
Hmm.
um, who buy into the whole concept. Um, and they develop. There are some photographs of them, kind of like sitting on a living room in the floor with makeup houses and a layout, and they're trying to figure it out. And they begin to develop their codes and standards, I guess, as a way of establishing principles, community principles, and CCNRs, but beyond just the streets and the buildings is more about these common areas and the expectation that individuals who live in common areas are asked to make decisions that are they have to come together to make decisions on what they think they want to do with the landscape. And I think that at the beginning, as I speak with some of the old timers, um, it was as if everyone is in the same mode. The people who chose to come to live here, they understood that this was a more progressive approach to moving into a suburban neighborhood. So there was a mindset. And the interesting thing about it is because in the 1972, 3, 4, 5, when they started planning and building, uh, I think that there was an oil embargo early in the 1970s. And
Mm.
that really sets the tone for people like Mike and Judy and many other progressives in the city of Davis, at the university, city councilmen who are looking at, oh, so now we have this issue with fossil fuels. Now we see that solar energy is starting to actually become more commercial. They started to some projects, some solar panels. People start to kind of find ways, and so that motivates them. And then Mike, as an architect, obviously is aware of solar passive energy principles or passive energy, passive solar. Uh, and that kind of puts in motion, I would say, the dynamics of working with other architects because the idea is that he builds his own homes um, for sale with his own designs, but he also sells lots. And so there's people who come in and they buy a lot and they also establish architectural principles. They wanted to make sure that the homes had some coherence between them. I mean, and also certain aspects of the social aspects. So, for example, if someone has a second story house, they need to make sure that there is no view from that second story house onto the front area of your neighbor
Right.
to create that privacy, that respect. But then you go to the back area, and then your neighbors would be outside, and there's no fences, so you say hello. On hi, how's it going? And What are you working on? Oh yeah, let's work on these projects. Or I just got these rocks and let's continue building the creek. And the beautiful thing is when you walk through the established place that it is right now, this mature landscape, you can see the work.
Mm,
You can see the work. The work is there. It's in the ground. It's on the swales. It's on the creeks. And to this day, the community members participate. It's all volunteer, and they do participate at different levels. They've as high as the board of directors that they have to participate, and then they also have an architectural review board. And so that if you want to bring a new project, a remodel, they want you to follow some guidelines and also to go to your neighbors and
mm,
have your adjacent neighbors actually sign off on your
mm,
project. And so that encourages people wanting to be in good terms with each other.
yeah.
Because if you want a project someday, you want to be able to knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, would you mind signing this form? So maybe that is aspects of where it's a little bit of a carrot and a stick, right? And so then there is a landscape horticultural committee. There's a water conservation committee. So there's a lot of folks participating. But your question was the intragenerational
Yeah.
uh,
And newer
changes.
folks who came
Yes,
in late.
and obviously right now, 50 years, so the folks that started in 75, 77, 79, um, some of them have passed away, uh, so their families have moved away, or they're still here.
Mhm.
Um, there was a large influx of children when the originals began to have their own kids.
Sure.
I was recently at the swimming pool and I saw someone that was one of the early fellows, and he was visiting with a family that had a young child, and they had recognized that they didn't build a kid pool, and they didn't build a kid pool because nobody had children. And so he said, "Yeah, we were selfish because we didn't think of kids at the time, so they just built a lap pool." Um, so they begin to have children, and as the kids come about, a few moms actually start thinking that they need childcare. So they create a co-op, and they
Ah,
created a co-op and they called it Rivendell. And Rivendell became a 40-year experience where they hire someone to be the director of the nursery, childcare for open, not only for community members. And that lasted a long time until a couple of years ago when, with the pandemic, there were some
right.
changes that affected the ability to continue to use the community center for it.
Ah,
So they chose, the board of directors approved that the nursery could be housed in the community center. So in a way, the community made almost like a sacrifice in the sense that the community center wouldn't be available during the week
right.
because we had the kids. And then they built a park for the kids and with volunteers. And I was involved at the time because I had two kids in the school. Um, so those dynamics are there. It's very organic. You can choose to participate in some group or not. There's voluntary work parties that the landscape committee calls for with the gardeners, and they want to uh, improve an area or make a change from grass to less water intensive a landscape, and so people come and help. Um, so then we have a period of time when I arrived in 1995, there were 15, 20 kids running around or more. And we would be doing potlucks and with the children and the families. And that generation is the generation of my son, who's 35 years old right now,
Okay.
and my second one is 30. And after that, when those kids go away, they went to university. We did have a dry spell where we were only getting older,
Mm,
all of us, and there wasn't an influx of new families, and a lot of it had to do most likely with price, and the cost of coming into the neighborhood. It's it's only more expensive as housing costs have just skyrocketed. But what has happened in the last 10 years has been very, very encouraging, because last 10, 12 years, there's a new crop of children. There's a whole 20 kids again, or more. And it has to do with wealthier families, maybe parents who help the kids get into a neighborhood like these. Some of the old timer kids have come back, and with their parents, they've been able to find a way to get back into the neighborhood. And so there's a renewal. I think
right.
that maybe that's a good concept to speak about, that the neighborhood, the community is renewing itself with new folks. We
Right.
did go through a period when there was an influx of people who came and bought into the place because it was a high value
Right.
real estate.
Investment. Yeah.
Yes, and some, and then it's then it when uh, uh, there's a whole maybe process, uh, time frame when these folks come in with their own ideas or interests and backgrounds into a place that is established with a sense of community, with a feel for how we go about doing things,
Right.
and how we maybe have uh, less expensive interests, or want to be live with less. And but some folks would say, oh, but that community center really looks old, and why don't we renovate it, and let's push for improvements.
Yeah.
And so there has been a little bit of um I wouldn't call it clash, but there was a time when, and the Rivendell nursery was affected by that, because some of the folks wanted the community center to be part of their community, to come and visit and do something different. So that's interesting. Um, uh, I'll let you think about that and ask me or make a comment on it. What do you think?
Well, I think that's kind of normal. But it's feels good to me that it sounds as if you've been able to maintain the original vision, even with all the changes and stuff, that it hasn't um, shattered or disappeared, which I think is really a key piece, because so much of the infrastructure development requires human help in order to keep it going. And so, you know, in this day and age, a lot of the young folks in particular don't really understand that kind of commitment or that time commitment. A lot of them feel so stressed by their own jobs and stuff that putting hands in the dirt or gardening or stuff like that is just really, like not on the agenda. So it's just good to feel that you've been able to sort of weather those things as time goes on, and include but not disappear.
Yes, and it feels really good. I was writing a few notes to myself after I read your questions, and I would say that if we did a survey of the community today, there would be a high degree of satisfaction um, among us, that the physical layout, the benefits. I garden. I've been gardening for 30 years in the same area. And, there's a swimming pool, there's fields, and there's playing grounds. So that physical infrastructure is fantastic. And
Yeah.
then the landscape is totally mature. And we live inside a lot of greenery
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
on the ground and above. And then it created a habitat, and it's filled with birds, all kinds of birds, and obviously squirrels and some rats. And um, but then so that also provides a comfort for
Yep.
for us to be able to live in these kind of spaces. But it's interesting to see how people embrace concepts and want and allow themselves to be modified. So, like if you come in as a young person without having had much of a nature contact experience, and here
Mhm.
you are in something like this, and something doesn't look totally perfect, or that tree has a broken branch, or and then over time, I think that they capture, and the more they engage with the soil, if they were to say, "Oh, let me try to be a gardener," I think that that's where you really feel the place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's get back to the design a little bit because
Sure.
I think that's really interesting too. And I think the concept of regenerative land design, especially designed to hold water, is fairly new. It's not hit the mainstream by any means. And it's become, I think, way more critical now that we're in this very volatile time of really changing weather patterns. We have no idea how the cycles we've come to depend on are going to withstand, or change. And so I think land design is one of the things that we humans can do to address those issues and to keep us as safe as we can be safe, in such a changing environment. But there are things we can do, and that's one of them. So I'm really curious.
Yes, and we talked about permeable and impermeable.
Yeah.
And the more permeable you have available, obviously, and in terms of land design, I think that the reason the cities are having the troubles that they're having is that it's so impermeable,
Exactly.
um, and there's no place for water to go,
That's
and
right.
then it could find its way on the streets. And so Mike Corbett envisions, and I'm kind of speaking for him in the sense that I had had conversations with him to ask him, how does he come about the layout of the landscape? And he looks at the wheat field and sees that there's no runoff or little runoff. He wants to replicate that. He knows that to do that, he needs a lot of impermeable spaces, permeable surfaces. And to do that, they go to the small lot. That's kind of where we were. So that's
Yep.
the connection with the small lot. And then the layout of the streets, east to west, north south facing, so that it's solar passive. And then narrow streets and no sidewalks. And to the extent that the streets um, will become water conveyors, where what they do is they slope this street facing north south. I'm talking just a little few inches, but it's sloped. So when it rains on the streets and there's gutters putting water on the streets, the water is all going to go and flow on one channel that is going to end up at one point is going to enter a swale that is dedicated to receiving water from that stream. And the same swale is receiving water from another swale that is coming from the northwest to the southeast. And that's kind of the layout. And so the fascinating thing is just to, if you have a blank piece of paper like he had, to decide, okay, where should the ridge be? And he looks at the west of where we are, and we have a mountain range, the coastal range.
Mm.
So the ridge is on the west. So he moves the soil up to the west and creates actually elevation. And so now he knows that he needs elevation so that through gravity he can move the water around. And the
Yeah.
water is going to find its way into the water that doesn't percolate in permeable areas is going to find its way into swales. And the swales are going to run west to east until they reach places where there's ponds and lagoons. And so
Mm.
on the east side is where the lagoons are located. Um, and that's the repository space for the water to sit and percolate. And if it's a big storm, there are pathways for the water to move a little further east into the stormwater system. So I think that water was a guiding principle for
Mm.
Mike in terms of how he's going to design this landscape. And he optimized the amount of water that will actually fall in this area by bringing water from streets into the neighborhood. Um, so I
So
think that
water trees,
beg your pardon?
to water trees, for instance.
Oh yes, and what's fascinating as I'm asking him questions with regards to the the deep percolation. So we do have a yellow clay soil, uh, clay loam that holds a lot of water.
Mm.
This is the kind of soil that has a huge water retention capacity
Nice.
as compared to sand or
Yeah.
and there are some spaces where there's some sandy areas, and those are the ones where water will could recharge an aquifer. But
Okay.
because it's these soils holding all that water, the trees are growing faster. And
Oh,
he starts to notice that actually the trees after 3 or 5, 7 years, the trees are growing big and getting bigger. And the water seems to actually uh, go deeper as the trees break through the soil with their roots and create more space for the water to infiltrate. And that's really what's fascinating is that all that water that was made available to the vegetation in the space um, has encouraged a biomass growth
no.
beyond what we would have had if these trees had been planted and irrigated by hand, meaning or just have these little spaces where rain will come to them. You know how in cities they plant trees on little spaces in between cement blocks.
Right.
That's a really poor place for a tree to grow, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, and
yes,
it's hard to get water there. I mean, there's no place for it to sit. It has to leave because there's just no space.
and those trees are just not going to grow the amount of biomass that otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think that the concept to answer to kind of go back to your thoughts is to understand water first. And I think that the folks that are doing water transformations, really actually there's some work being done in Australia by a fellow called Yeoman, and he's passed away, but his children still have a Yeoman Institute, and it was the same idea. He he wanted to see if he was invited to go to a landscape. He came to California. I was working at the time with an agency, and we had projects, and we brought him in, and he would go to this landscape because he was going to consult with a ranger or a rancher, and so to see where the water will be flowing. That was the first place he wanted to understand. Once he understood how the water was flowing, then you can build your landscape around that.
Yeah.
Well, you can modify where the water is going as well, obviously, but that was your guiding principle.
Right. Right. Yeah. I really wish that we had more sense of that now. I think it would make a huge difference, especially with all the flooding issues. I mean, it's the whole system. You've got to have water to stay, and you've got to direct where that water goes so that it really will seep down. You've got to have plantings so that the roots will go down and help aerate the soil to hold the water. I mean, it's all together. You can't take a part out and not have and still have it work. It needs all of those
It,
pieces.
and I think that water has been engineered, uh, or water systems are engineered
Yeah.
to move water out of the way.
Yes. Yes.
Obviously,
They.
living in the Sacramento Valley, we understand that the city of
Yeah.
Sacramento was flooding all the time and they needed to build the levees. But they also understood that once those levees get breached, is because the water in the river is just too much of it. So what they created in this area where I live is the Yolo bypass. And it's a bypass so that when the river is bringing way too much water from Shasta, from the Shasta Mountains, they allow water to leave the river, to exit the river and flooding plains. So
Uh-huh.
it is doing what the river was doing in the past,
Right.
uh, without us in the escape. Uh, River overflows, goes into the floodplains, and then that's it. But as more people come in and build along the rivers,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
agriculture claims that floodplain, we need levees to hold the river, but obviously you can only do so much. But what they did in Sacramento region is really smart. They created these uh, bypasses, and in this time of the year during the winter, and right now I was just picking up someone at the airport. As you drive towards the airport, you go through the bypass by the
Mm.
Sacramento River. Right now, it's filled with rice, so they
Oh,
become rice fields.
uh-huh.
So there's this opportunity to actually understand that you can work with
Yeah.
production agriculture, but at the same time allow water to find a place to be. It's
Nice.
hard when you have already paved so much of the land
Yeah.
and where you have channeled so many of the rivers. To re-engineer, it may be even harder than engineer.
Yes, that's why we're a big proponent of starting with that first. Yeah. And it reduces costs. I mean, if you don't have to put that hardscape in, one of the stories I remember Carl telling from the village homes is that when they decided to do the green infrastructure instead of the hard infrastructure, the money that they would have spent on concrete pipes, they put into fruit trees.
There was a savings. They had to do a bond at first to secure with the city that this project was going to work, and um, but there was a significant savings in not having to install underground stormwater pipes.
Yes. Yeah.
The other savings that I understand is once you get your landscape and you're holding all that water, um, a lot of that water lasts longer, meaning that you have fewer irrigations to have to
Right.
do come spring, summer. A few. Uh, 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 so it also has an element of that, that you wouldn't have to use as much water
Yes.
uh,
Yeah.
for that growth. Um,
Did he concern himself at all with gray water or gray water use?
No, no, I don't think that we have anything that has to do with
I
gray
mean,
water
cities are pretty
project.
dicey about that. They don't really like it. So I'm not surprised, but I just wondered.
Yeah, it's so easy just to flush it
Yeah.
and let it go to a facility that is dedicated, engineered, and
Yeah.
it also has a biogas digester in
Yeah.
it. And makes sense, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and I don't know how long it's going to make sense because as water gets more unreliable, we really need to make better and better use of the water we do get. And gray water is one of the things we get, and I think it can be utilized, but it's dicey. I mean, it has its challenges for sure.
So maybe I misunderstood when you said gray water. You're not referring to wastewater,
No, not sewage, but
but
things like
sewage.
from washing clothes, doing dishes, that kind of water
Okay.
that's
That's
not.
already mixed into the same system, actually. It goes
Yeah,
to
yeah, right.
a
That's what cities
municipality.
do. They put it all together. They don't separate it out. But if it
Yes.
is separated out, it has to be done pretty much on a site by site basis. But there are ways now of really using that water. And it's additional water. I mean, it's additional water.
Yes.
It's water that's here. And if you already have it and have already used it and use it again, it does save using clean water. So
Right.
yeah,
And that's obviously a cost benefit in terms of what it is that you're paying for the water that you're buying
Yeah.
at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I was looking at some of your thoughts. Um, we talked about, do I think is being successful? Absolutely. But
Yeah.
then it leads to your next question of um, um, why haven't they made more or built more of these
Yeah.
projects? And Mike actually tried. He put forward a very interesting project, not as comprehensive as this one is, because to get this project funded or approved by the planning department uh, was quite an effort, and they had to really convince a lot of people that this was going to work, that it wasn't going to flood, that
Right.
that we knew what we were doing.
Mhm.
Um, and there were several folks in the city council that were also students of the university that had graduated and moved into politics, and they were more progressive and willing and understanding. But the fire department didn't like the project because the streets were narrow and they all
You're
end
right.
up cul-de-sacs, and so they had to make sure that the truck will be able to take a turn. And
Sure.
so there are complexities in being able to put these kind of projects forward. But the other, I think the maybe the biggest reason why projects like these have not been replicated by other developers, I think it has to do with the profit margins. And I
Mm.
think that in if you look at it without knowing some of the details, you would think that they left a lot of money on the table,
Yeah.
meaning there's so much open space. How do you not put more houses there? Well, when I spoke with Judy about that, they don't feel that way because they feel that by going with the small lot, the land that they would have been dedicated to a larger lot to fill the whole 60 acres with houses with big lots is proportional to the small lot, more common land
Open
available.
space. Sure. Sure. Sure.
So
That
that
makes
that
sense. Yeah.
mindset, that
Yeah.
paradigm is really the breakthrough. Is to
Yeah.
say, no, it's okay. We're still going to come out well in terms of our margin. And they didn't charge more or less when they moved, they started to build these lots and houses. It was similar prices to what it was already developing in the West Side. Um, but it was just that mindset of saying, hey, we can have more with less.
Yeah. 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 Because we certainly have less with more.
So more with less is really the key word, the
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah. 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 There's such a movement now to really look at the green in cities because it offers so many benefits. I mean, quite apart from the more academic things like it relieves the pressure from the heat dome, it cools the city, it cleans the water, cleans the air. Those are all true. But the physical and psychological benefits to humans living in green space is just starting to be truly recognized. I heard of a research project which I've not been able to find yet, in Oregon, where the guy was looking at the ash borer beetle and how it went through a city area and they had to cut down all the trees. And he was able to record an increase in heart issues, an increase in strokes, and an increase in mental problems in those areas that lost trees. So there's a
Hmm.
direct correlation to that. And I think the more we understand that, the more open cities will be to really paying attention to the green because it just serves the city in so many ways and reduces so many other unintended costs, that you might not have thought about. But it's expensive to have ambulances dealing with people who have issues all the time. And if you can reduce that, that makes a big deal.
Okay. I would definitely, from personal experience, living in rural areas. for a long time, having lived in urban areas before with the buses and the trucks and everything is running
Right.
around. There's a huge improvement in quality of life,
Yes.
uh, in the desire to live, in the sense of the pleasure of listening to birds,
Yes.
the contact with soil if you're gardening, that the microbes and the insects and all of that. The idea that we are so separated from nature as a species that unfortunately we were almost given a command that we were here to dominate nature. And as such, we come to the 21st century having dominated nature
Right.
based on its accumulation and extraction and exploitation, and with all of the ramifications of pollution and degradation and the loss of species
Yes.
and the
Yeah.
loss of habitat, only so that we can satisfy our desire to build these cities and the concrete and all the other amenities and luxuries that we are so
Yes.
excited about. I think that this breakthrough is similar to what we said earlier with regards to um, let's have smaller lots and more common
Mm.
land.
Yeah.
And it's a mental transformation. We can do all the engineering, but it's really the breakthrough has to be in our minds to be able to recognize that there is more with less. And it's fascinating. There is a concept about using energy in a sufficiency basis, not efficiency, but sufficiency. Obviously, if you can conserve, that's the best. If you don't
Right.
use a kilowatt hour, great. But if you have to use a kilowatt hour, you can say, "Oh, I'm going to be more efficient with it," but that means that I'm going to squeeze the value of that kilowatt hour. Whereas I can also ask the question, well, maybe I don't need the whole kilowatt hour because I don't need that AC running at that temperature. I can maybe do something different. And sufficiency is also a fantastic way for us people to understand that we want to be able to satisfy our basic necessities.
Yes.
And even within our basic needs, we want to also be judicious about it. Unlike me, not eat too much.
Yeah.
And but then you go to the what is your list of non-essentials? And we all have non-essentials. And then what is your list of luxuries?
Yeah.
And like you shouldn't have luxuries. Stick with the essentials and a few non-essentials. How far
Yeah.
will that go?
Yeah. We can have good lives. We don't need to have, and there's something also about, I don't know, some of the challenges that we're facing now of entitlement and those kinds of things that come from this really commitment to contentment and convenience. And those two things just really eat up um, a lot of what it means to be human. It really dehumanizes us in so many ways. We become um, less agents of our own doing and more passive and at the beck and call and need of other people and mechanical things to manage all that stuff that we used to do. Instead of walking to the grocery store, we have to have a car or some other thing, which requires this whole amount of support. Where walking doesn't require a lot of support at all. You get up and you do it, and your body benefits, and your health benefits, and your community benefits because you get to see people. And we've kind of lost that. We feel like we shouldn't do that anymore. It's old fashioned or it takes too much time, and instead of seeing how much it adds to life.
Yes, yes, and to the extent that we spoke about how we are so separated from nature,
Yeah.
in that process of separation, we don't have empathy for nature,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so as we lose empathy for nature, we lose empathy for ourselves and our other folks, and to the extent that it goes back to respect and stewardship.
Yes.
I wish that I really, really wish that the Old Testament had spoken about stewardship right away, right at the beginning, instead of saying to the Adam and Eve that this is for you to have. And
Yeah.
then after Noah survives the floods, he once again, Jehovah says, and this is for you to dominate.
I've heard that's a mistranslation, actually.
Even if he's not. At the
Yeah,
end of
but
the day, at the end of the day, men interpreted it the
they
way it
did.
was
Yep.
there. Because what we have, the men became was a
Yeah.
dominant force.
Yeah.
Um, so there's really no excuse.
Um, I just had this thought and it went in and out of my mind. Oh, I have heard, and is this still true, that because of the fruit trees in the gardens, that a lot of the residents can get most of their food needs from the land. So this reduces grocery bills. And now, my God, grocery bills are so expensive. I mean, they've just gone through
Okay.
the roof. Is that still true?
So I'll share with you, yes, to some extent. So there's yes to the fruit trees that are part of the community.
Mm-hmm.
So we have common area trees and vines that only the people who live in those areas can benefit from. But then there are large areas of land where there are orchards or vineyards, and those orchards are for everyone to go to with a principle of respect and sufficiency, because you don't want to go in and harvest the whole tree and take it with you home. You
Right.
want to bring your green bag that has Village Homes stamp on it so that people know that you're in the community, and you take 310, and then you're aware of the fact that this is a shared tree. And that's also interesting, that we educate ourselves to, oh, we're not here to be selfish, or we actually is not the right, it's more about what's enough for me and my family.
Mhm.
So we go back to sufficiency in that sense. But then when it comes to the garden, the vegetable areas, so these gardens, we lease the land, and that kind of pays for the water. And you can have a smaller, medium, or bigger. And so I have a larger piece. I garden with a friend of mine, and he we he set up chickens, so we get eggs from the chickens, and we do have a year-round uh, cropping system. And to the extent that there's a significant amount of food that we produce, that we don't go to the supermarket to buy squash, zucchini, tomatoes, peppers, um,
Onions.
cucumbers, onions, garlic. Uh, so yes, we get a significant. Gardening can be expensive too. I mean, you have to buy things and you put into the ground and you buy tools, but yes, it is a fantastic experience. And people who garden in these garden areas see each other and say hello to each other and visit with each other. And sometimes people share what's happening, or what they're doing, or what's eating their tomatoes.
Right.
So that is also very beneficial to the spirit of the individual.
Do you do like the words are escaping me, a place to sell goods? So,
No,
the farmer's market kind of thing.
oh, in the city, yes, there is a very large farmers market that is available for certified farmers who
Okay,
are
but you don't do
certified,
that locally amongst
like
yourself.
ourselves. Like
Yeah.
if we harvest it from here and go take it to sell. No, that is
Yeah,
that
no,
what?
no, I was thinking more like, because people raise different things. I'm big on rhubarb. Not everybody
We
would have
share.
rhubarb.
If I
Okay,
have
so
to, if I
just be
have,
shared.
so
Okay.
so we share. So a friend of mine, she grows better carrots than I ever can, and so I visit with her and I get some carrots, or I know that a friend could use some onions. So it's really more a barter system in that regard.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is
just
great because it's also part of that social component.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very
No,
good.
it's you asked me if how does it feel living here? Well, uh, yeah, it's a fantastic place to live in, and obviously you become a better person.
Mm,
I think that you become a better person, not only for the aspects that we spoke about, the landscape and nature and how it gives you so much, but also with regards to people. So I'm not a totally like extrovert or uh, wanting to have meet people and have friends all the time, and but you can be as extrovert or as introvert as you are, and folks, they just cannot communicate. And we see a lot of people because you go to the front of your house or you go to the back areas and you have no fences, and you take your walks or you take a bike ride, or there's people playing in the park, and there are folks in the swimming pool. There's the folks in the garden. So there are many places where people actually get to see and say hello and know each other, or I haven't met you before. And so there is a lot of that taking place that is rare in your more standardized
yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
neighborhoods.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fortunate. I know the names of almost everybody in my block, but we've had two people, three that have just moved in, and one is just moving out, and I haven't had a chance to meet them. And there, you have to force it. I have to actually go through their fence and knock on their door to say
Mm-hmm.
hello, because otherwise I don't see them. They're not out. They don't sit on their porch. I haven't seen any. I've seen one person working in her yard. The other people, I I have not even really seen all the people who live in the house yet, outside, because they're all inside. They're all doing stuff where they get in their cars and go someplace. So we just don't.
That
I did.
reminds me. I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'll pick up from that thought because it reminds me of a phrase that I heard Judy talk about, how small lots, more common area, creates the spaces for people to find themselves.
Oh,
Um, because you don't have a backyard to be at your backyard doing your barbecue, playing on your own, but you have this common area to go to, and that's open space. And it was another. It's almost as a social engineering. We talked about physical engineering. This is as if it was social engineering because it was forcing individuals to have to know each other,
yeah.
especially in the 4 and 4 a block of homes in the back areas, because you are responsible, commonly responsible for the swales, and you have to make decisions. And I think that I would say that for the most part, everyone, I mean, we're still human and we could say, oh, that guy, I can't stand that person. But for the most part, I think that people have really made an effort to to go beyond.
I would think people with kids would do that much more easily. I mean, the kids kind of drive that. They go down the street to somebody and they're going to play with somebody. They don't care who they are. And so the parents kind of have to talk to each other occasionally.
Somewhat. Um, think about what would it take to um, find blocks of land that is paved, that are left out, that have not been developed or are in decay. Um, how would it be possible to find those maybe 40-acre lots, blocks? Let's imagine a series of blocks in an urban area that could be recovered by removing all of the cement and all of the concrete and the asphalt, because the soil is still going to be there. The
Mhm.
soil will come back once you feed it and bring water to it and bring compost and nurture it. And if it was possible to actually um, recreate these spaces with more permeable areas. Uh, by I'm thinking cities like Detroit or other cities that have gone through really difficult times when they have lost
Oh,
factories,
Detroit's
jobs.
an urban
Huh?
farm. Detroit's an urban farm. They lost so many houses, blocks and blocks of houses that they just
Yes.
flattened and got rid of, and they had all this empty land. And people put farms.
Oh,
So
they
they have
have.
farms downtown. Oh yeah, Detroit is a
Ah,
huge, huge urban farming place.
okay. So I'm
Yeah,
behind
it's
the
amazing.
trolley.
It's amazing what they've done. But we're
Okay.
actually, the Soil Smart folks are really working on this with using the Miyawaki forest method.
Mm-hmm.
So Miyawaki was a Japanese guy, and he figured out a method for planting small forests. Because that's to your point. If you're already in an urban area, there's not a lot of places left. But Miyawaki's technique can be as small as 6 parking places. That's about 1,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
It's not very big. Many backyards are big enough or
Right.
bigger than this. And you plant original plants and the entire forest all together in one day. You water it for 3 years and it's self-sustaining. It grows 8 times faster than regular trees, and it brings back the biodiversity because you're recreating the actual forest. And in 25 years, it mimics old growth. So I have this fantasy that we could get neighbors in a block to do their backyards,
Oh, yes.
just with it,
Okay.
even with the fences or whatever, you could just plant along there. And in 3 years, it would be fantastic.
Even with the fences.
Wouldn't that be
Breaking
amazing?
down the fences is a tough call.
Well, you don't have, I don't think you'd have to actually. You may want to, but I think
Yeah.
if you just planted through the backyards, that
Mhm.
would be for the animals and the critters, it would be a continuous piece. They would
Yes,
kind
and
of
it will
get to that.
require an understanding of how water is going to flow,
Yeah, well, there's that.
so,
Yes.
so that water can be present uh, to sustain the vegetation.
Hmm.
Uh, I think that is the challenge going forward is to find ways within urban and suburban
Yep.
areas for them to understand how to embrace water again or embrace it in the first place.
Yeah.
Water, I mean, water can be a scary
Oh, yeah. It's got a
situation.
mind of its own. Yeah.
It's got a power with it,
Yeah.
and it can
Yeah.
wipe you out and your
Yeah.
house and your car and all that. So it's not as if thinking, oh, we just need to go back to the 17th century and have floodplains and all, but let's re-engineer them in a way that
Yeah.
allows water to be part of this new approach.
Yeah. I like that thought to have water be a part of it. We talk a lot about keeping the water we get because
Yes.
for most cities, especially all those that I know of, the rainfall exceeds the use,
Yes.
but we don't keep it. We get rid of it as fast as it comes down.
Yes.
And so that's for me where the soil sponge comes in, because the best place to keep that water is in the dirt.
Have you looked at the Chinese model of sponge cities?
Yes,
You're familiar with
yes,
that, obviously. Yes.
yes. No, he's done
Mhm.
beautiful work. Yeah, just beautiful work. And to make it a national policy, I
Yes.
mean, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're
Right.
way behind on that one.
Well, thanks for doing what you're doing, because it takes eh, citizen power
Yeah,
uh, to communicate to the people that you're electing to your city councils
yeah,
and your county board of supervisors, um, to bring change at the local level,
yeah,
which is really where you need it.
yep,
But you brought the change to even the backyard level, which I like that a lot. If you could agree with folks that we're going to create our backyards more like little forests.
Yeah.
Um, that's a really powerful way to go local.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. So I'm optimistic that we can create a mini movement to do that here in Spokane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, Ricardo, you've been wonderful. It's just wonderful to hear the story, and it's such a magical place. You know, it makes me jealous. I would love to be there.
Oh, yeah, make your own.
Yes, well, that's the
Yes.
next best thing.
Wonderful.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Um, uh, if you want to share my letters about water site with your friends, for them to visit and look at the videos that
Okay.
I have on Village Homes, and I would suggest that if folks want to get a bigger picture, look for one that is called the Land Water Energy Nexus.
Okay.
It's a documentary I prepared several years ago, and I had an opportunity to interview Judy Corbett, and she
Oh,
allowed me to use her voice in the documentary, looking at the land
yeah.
and that water connection, and then the energy being both passive and active energy.
Yeah.
Obviously, because they went through passive solar systems, and that was part of the energy. And then by capturing all that water and giving the landscape and the more time to receive the indigenous water, it meant that they didn't have to pump or buy water as much as otherwise if they wanted to have this massive amount of biomass. And so
Right.
there's another component to that. And let's
Are
stay in
there,
touch.
yes. Are the Corbetts still alive?
Oh, I hope they live for another 20 years.
Good.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
very
or
good.
more. I
Yeah,
shouldn't just say 20 years.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And they have one of their son actually has built a house for himself here in the neighborhood
Oh,
uh,
nice.
with two kids. So there is a intragenerational renewal
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
place. And I really like that a lot, me personally. At some point, it felt like we were an old community.
Yeah.
But with the renewal of new families coming in and more children, and we get to play and we play soccer and other activities, it gives you a life, gives me a life.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. So
You're
much.
welcome. So
Really
welcome. It's
appreciate
a
it.
real pleasure, Kathryn.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.